we wanted to create a company that was going to set a high standard for how the industry should actually work, right? We wanted to bring in the marketplace the kind of quality operation, the quality play, the quality product that we were hoping to create when we passed the legislation. So I did have some background in being a lawyer, a startup lawyer, and business development lawyer. So I had some understanding of how startups work, found some partners, and we were able to put together a good quality product and try to set a high standard for how the industry should work. So for me, it was sort of like, I'm not in office, I'm not making policy, but I do want the marketplace to represent all the goals that we had when we created that policy to begin with. And then, of course, you start a business, and who the hell knows what happens after that.
No, but I love that. And I appreciate you talking about sort of the mission that goes into starting a company. Well, yes, it's selling products. It's also much more than that. It's ensuring that the products that consumers are getting are safe and of quality. So thank you so much for that.
The one thing I would add is, the longer you're in this space, the more you realize what a healthier alternative these products are to what people have been consuming for so long. So when we think about our company, it's about how do we reach consumers who are new or are curious about cannabis but don't have a ton of experience, and how do we keep them coming back, right? So it's part of a larger mission to, help people be healthier as they are enjoying a good time.
Thank you so much for adding that. So a question sort of for all of you. So you each have a slightly different perspective on cannabis regulations today, either as an employee, an entrepreneur, as a lawyer. Sort of what are some of the biggest hurdles that you see in regulation today and helping people be successful? And do you think those things will be made easier in the future, or are they things that people should continue to watch out for?
I think the first thing I would say is like the flux that we've been in since August 1st. We delayed in getting a director, then we had a director for 13 hours, then we didn't have a director. So that's kind of that keeps changing the timeline for companies. And that's just something that's hard to keep up with, especially going into a new session. Like our company, and I'm sure your company and every company would prefer that we already have rules set. That's not happening. So we're just still wait and see. And that I do think will get better, because eventually they do have to make someone do the job. And the second thing is they have to.
They can't have an interim forever.
Yeah. How about Caleb?
Yeah,
Caleb, yeah. But the second thing is, I think education on the regulatory side, on like the authority side. The case in Elk River is like a great one. His name Crystal. Maddox, right? Yeah.
Yes. The student at Elk River.
Yeah, that was just the school not understanding the law. That's all that was. They put that kid's life in its own flux because they just didn't get the law, and companies are running into the same thing where city council doesn't know what they can and can't legislate on. So they just throw a moratorium. And that sucks for companies, but that's another thing I think will get better with time.
Yeah, either way.
Okay. I have been disappointed to see companies continue to struggle with banking. I have heard, there's a lot of nods in this room. I've been referring people to a couple of banking partners, and I think that it's sort of, some people have kind of worked through it eventually, but it's harder than I had hoped that it would be, in 2023. I think real estate may continue to be a challenge as well, both to find cannabis-friendly landlords, or to be able to buy a building and take a mortgage for that. My hope is that banks will be willing to do that for non-exorbitant rates, but we'll see. And that actually leads me, I guess, to the biggest challenge, which is capital, right? We've been talking to a lot of people about debt, equity, convertible debt, but I do see investors sitting on the sidelines because, again, they're not sure who to invest in because they don't know who's going to get a license, and they, probably aren't going to get a return unless you get a license, unless you're doing something else like hemp-derived or, selling to the homegrown folks or whatever, right? Something you don't need that license for. So, I think that's a big struggle for everybody, that investor money and then those Minnesota grant monies that were set aside for the bill have kind of not yet come online. And so I'm really looking forward to that happening and trying to think a lot about how to push that and get that to start flowing.
Yeah, I would agree with everything you both said. I think the big challenge, you touched on it, is education, right? Even when the law is pretty clear, even when the experience of other states shows the path, people are still, whether it's in local government or it's in banking or insurance or wherever it is, they are very slow to understand what exactly the rules are. And if you've been in this a long time, you know kind of the ins and outs. But when we created the bill, it took, we went to 15 places around the state. We had it, even when we passed it in 2022 or 21, I can't remember now. We went through 20 committees. They had to do the same thing in the House and Senate again this year. And they just didn't even really get into the real policy issues in those committees, right? The level of knowledge and education it takes to really understand the way this industry works, the way the regulations work is intense, and it will take a frustratingly long time for people to figure it out. In our business, the last legislature made it clear that liquor stores are allowed to sell hemp-derived beverages. Well, a whole bunch of local governments just didn't think that applied in their communities, and we're passing moratoria or having these enormous license fees. Even though it's all going to disappear in 2025, they were still getting in the way. And then what's the liquor store going to do? Sue the city that gives them a license? Probably not. What are their remedies? It's not really clear. So it's just this kind of frustrating time it takes to get people up to speed on what the rules are. And I think that is going to be a reality for quite a while.
Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing that. A question sort of more for you and John and Ryan. So you both helped to draft legislation, either as an activist or as a lawmaker. House File 600 has many similarities to House File 100 of today. You helped work. If you go on YouTube, you can find a video back in 2018 of this guy trying to say, hey, here's the bill that we should be passing here in Minnesota. And there's a lot of similarities to today's bill.
House File 420.
Oh, yeah. So I wanted to ask each of you guys, is there anything that you either helped write into the bill or helped fight for that continued to today that you're especially proud to see either go online or soon go online here in Minnesota?
I think all the work with the Great Rise Coalition, like around equity, and the social equity director position, and the grants that are built into the bill, all of that is I think the stuff I'm most proud of, by far, because that's the why. It's why do you get into this? Because it's stupid people are getting arrested. So now we have a system that all the people who got arrested can find their way back to just being made whole. And that was the most important thing. Was the rest of the whole question?
Yeah, just what did you fight for that you're happy to see continue into the bill?
Yeah, I think that was the biggest one.
For sure.
It's hard for me to separate out one particular component. I'll just say this. When we were creating the legislation in 2019 and 2020, there was no pushback on the criminal expungement provisions at all. There was nobody who was saying this is going too far. And so we pushed it as far as we possibly could. What is the most we can possibly do to start to right the wrongs of prohibition over the years? And, it had to be modified a bit to fit the realities of where records are kept and how the system actually works. But the idea that we would be automatically expunging records without putting the burden on the people themselves to make an application or try to go before a board and hire a lawyer, that's how expungement usually works. And we just said at a certain level, all of these are expunged. They're done. And at the same time, when we created the expungement board, we are not putting the burden on people to come forward to show why their particular case deserves expungement and another doesn't, even though it's at a higher level under the criminal code. So we were ready to go as far as we could. I don't think there's anything more Minnesota could have done to make the expungement system better. And I think that is, it was just terrific to work with so many people who were fully committed, especially to the racial justice aspect of that bill.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. Oh, yeah, please do.
I gotta say my least favorite part of the bill is the possession limits. I think they don't make sense with how much we're allowed to grow. And this is totally out there, but
I wasn't the author this year.
Well, talk to Zach. Talk to Zach, man.
Yeah, no, thanks for adding that in. I'm a home grower myself, went through the process of making rosin out of my own flower, which was really cool. And when people ask how much I got, I say exactly 8 grams and not any more, because that's the legal maximum, even at home.
It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Lot to continue to push for. So Jen, a question for you. So today's conversation is the current state of cannabis. And I think those that are in the industry would say that the biggest defining thing for the current state of cannabis is people trying to figure out what's next. Maybe it's I'm staying in the hemp low dose side of things, continuing to operate there, continuing to find my niche. Maybe it's moving up to adult use. Maybe it's figuring out some way, which if you look at the legislation is more challenging than one might think, but to sort of engage in both. How are you advising people through this time period? Sort of what are you asking them to consider as they're trying to figure out what comes next for them in their business?
Oh, that's a big question, Tanner. Okay, let's see. I think I want everybody to remember that right now we are in a very weird time, very weird interim time, that cannabis is legal to possess and to grow, but not to sell, except for the tribes. They get to make their own rules. And that this is just an interim period. Eventually, we will be done with this very weird in-between time. And I am looking forward to that time greatly. So I'm working hard to help people who are doing business in the hemp-derived space to understand the rules that apply to them, as amended, as interpreted as time goes on, right? Which, by the way, is normal. That is like how regulated industries work. It's just painful for everyone, but it is normal. And then those folks or other folks, I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs who are excited to plan to apply for licenses. And so helping them scope out a business that fits squarely within a license or a set of licenses that they are allowed to hold together, which is, of course, not very many, because we're not a vertically integrated state in general. And trying to help imagine that business with enough particularity to be able to describe it in a license that will create a story that is compelling and help people get there. So there's so much to come. It's just, it's somewhat daunting, actually.
Yeah. All right, so a question for each of you. So obviously right now in Minnesota, we don't have a director of the Office of Cannabis Management. I'm not gonna ask you guys to pick who you think would be the best choice for that. But one thing that I would like to hear is sort of what would you like to see in the next director of that office? You each sort of touch the industry in a slightly different way. Likely you'll all interact with that director in some way in the work that you do. What's sort of one thing you'd like that director to either have in mind or have as a skill set when they come to that role?
That we have like the most determined, talented people already in the industry, and that should be the number one resource, is like what I really want from this OCM director, that they use the people who have had to just like navigate all this stuff over the last like 3-4 years and still came out the other end. Like, how do you do that? Like, as Minnesotans, because weed is like a big money thing. We know all the MSO, all multi-state operators, all these outside companies are coming here. So I need an OCM director to understand that we got something here that we need to grow first before we expand with all these other out-of-state actors.
Unicorn
Cool. Yeah.
is what you actually need in this role. I mean, somebody who can engage and understand the legacy community, the emerging entrepreneurship that's come along, people who understand what the kind of local government mindset is and how to operate in the context of the broader Minnesota community, somebody who also understands how to actually make things work in state government, because you can have wonderful intentions and you can be the most principled person, but if you don't actually understand how the levers in state government work, it doesn't really matter that much. So you need some combination of a person who is able to engage and kind of translate the values in the community and the goals and aspirations, take that to heart and take it seriously, while understanding how to move the state. And it's different. I was a legislator. I don't know the first thing about being a director of a state agency. It's not something I've done. I've spent no time in the executive branch. And so, finding a person with executive branch experience, maybe in Minnesota, maybe from somewhere else, who has a demonstrated commitment to the community is what I think we need.
Oh man, you guys had such good answers. So both of what they said. And then I think also someone who is committed to making fair rules that are achievable by the small business owner. Because when we set regulatory standards, there are sort of two big things that tend to often happen. One is that those standards are so costly that you have to be a big MSO in order to seize those opportunities. So they look like fair rules on their face, but they either through ignorance or malice, make sure that the business can only be seized by somebody with significant capital. The other thing that we've seen in some cannabis, some other cannabis spaces is rules not being enforced fairly against different players in the industry. And so I think that's a really important thing for any head of OCM to think about. I think one of the things that we learned, or I guess that we knew and maybe everybody else learned with the 18 hours of the OCM is that this industry wants to be regulated and wants to be regulated fairly, which is maybe surprising to, to some folks who think of cannabis as the Wild West or we're excited to be the Wild West. I think no, I heard a lot of people say, we don't want somebody who doesn't follow the rules, right? And I think that's because we trust that we get the fair share as the legacy market, as the craft cannabis market, if those rules are enforced fairly.
All right, well, sort of coming into the end part of our panel today, a question that I have for you all is that, as we've heard, cannabis is ever shifting here in Minnesota. Rules are evolving, regulations are changing, trends are ebbing and flowing. What types of things are you looking for over the next couple of months or next year here in Minnesota?
I'm looking forward.
Yeah, what are you looking forward to? Or what are you very nervous about?
Oh,
Either way.
Okay, either. Okay. I am perpetually anxious about session, I guess. It's going to come and there will be changes and those changes will determine everything. So we think we have a law right now, but it's it could be a very different law come next year in some ways. And it's those things make me anxious, and I guess, but I'm also looking forward to being a part of that process of okay, how do we take HF 100 and if there is a way to make it better, how do we do that, or how do we protect it from changing in ways that make it worse? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking forward to doing that with all other businesses. Yeah.
I totally agree with what you're saying, John, and especially the part about vigilance. People often say this, you probably heard it before, prohibition ended in 1933 and there's been a new liquor bill passed in Minnesota virtually every year since. There is no reason to think cannabis won't be the same. And then who are the people who have the resources to be at the legislature year in and year out and have the relationships with legislators, have the relationships with agencies? It's people with money, right? It's people who have a long-term goal and they know how to operate in these systems and they put their resources to bear on the system and it will work over time. So for the Minnesota community, there is no alternative to the kind of vigilance you're talking about in order to make this work. I personally am looking forward to some of the laws being a little bit clearer. Hopefully it's mostly cleanup. There's some inconsistencies. There's a lot of work done in short order. Yeah. And I think a general housekeeping kind of cleanup bill would be good. In the hemp space, I think working on the insurance issue for on-premise sales is really important, especially. And I've got some ideas for what we can do about that and hope to see some interesting possibilities to normalize and regularize these industries and make them more mainstream, easier to do business with, and grow this whole space as a place where people can safely recreate.
So since you guys both had such good answers, I'm gonna go a little out of left field and say I think that we are, and loop back to your first question as well, say that I think that we are starting to see the economic possibility of the home grow legalization starting to be realized, with the classes and the grow tents and the consulting I'm starting to see pop up around that and so forth. I think that next spring is going to be really big for people growing at home. And I'm excited to see all these new people on Facebook showing off their plants.
Awesome. Well, I certainly enjoyed hearing from you all today, and I'm sure these people did too. If they're looking to hear more from you or to get in contact with you, where can they go to get in touch?
Go to retrobakery.net, call my boss, and he will put me on the phone. But also, John Barty on LinkedIn, spelled the exact same way. It's up there.
There it is.
It's like, because I didn't bring any cards, I changed my pens.
Thank you for doing
Wow.
that.
So much truth here. Wow.
You can always, our website, crookedbeverage.com. My email is rw@crookedbeverage.com. But Instagram, our company's Instagram is good. Any social media platform, I'm pretty easy to find.
And I am at northstarlaw.com. There are other North Star law groups in the world, but we are the one in Minnesota that we are focusing on cannabis as well as some other vertical industries. And you can also call our front desk number at 651-330-9678. And I would love to talk to you.
Perfect. Well, let's go ahead and give each of these people a round of applause. So Jen, John, Ryan, thank you guys so much for joining us today for our panel. Once again, my name is Tanner Barris. I'm with the Minnesota Cannabis College. You can learn more about us at mncannabiscollege.org. But that's all that we've got for today. Thank you all so much for joining us for the current state of cannabis. We'll be in touch with you very soon.
Good job, Ken.
Thank you.
Take care of it too.
Oh, yeah. The thing is,